The Sacred Mount has changed the Monster Hunter formula so much, to many longtime fans it's probably unrecognizable. Now, being someone myself who loves difficult games more than anything else, I was initially disappointed when learning about just how easy the game has possibly become. But later on, I realized that maybe my concern has actually been misplaced. If you are keen on the traditional Monster Hunter experience, one not too dissimilar from Monster Hunter World, then I will tell you how it seems like Wilds is much faster and simpler, but won't actually feel too foreign, and how I think the game is probably easier, but in all the right ways. Now, the elephant in the room here is just how easy it is to heal while fighting against a monster. You can call the Sacred Mount to your side at any time during the fight, and whilst on that Sacred, you can perform actions that used to require your character remaining static for long periods of time, including things like healing items, using whetstones, and even eating the food to improve your stamina. Now, I'll talk about this, several other updates that remove difficulty from the game, including quality of life improvements, and one last item that people really haven't given as much thought as I would have expected. Honestly, this isn't a huge drastic change to the Monster Hunter formula for those who are used to playing multiplayer, since in multiplayer, you can have your allies distracting the monster while you sit down and spend the next 3 hours of your life sharpening your blade with your whetstone. However, in the solo play, it's a much bigger deal. Obviously, you have your Palico to help, so it's not too bad, but it was much more difficult for you to find reprieve to use these different items that are a big part of the Monster Hunter experience. Now, although the game is somewhat easier because of this, the topic is actually a lot more nuanced than that. And this is a trend you will notice with all of the things I'm going to talk about today. Now, previously when you were low on HP, you'd just dodge attack after attack after attack from a distance until either your Palico draws aggro or the monster is doing a poorly timed attack where they're just doing like an AoE thing really far away from you. At this time, you would heal, use your whetstone, eat food, whatever it might be. Now, on more difficult monsters, this could take up to a minute of your time, probably longer, and the Sacred eliminates this waiting time and gets you healed up and back into the fight almost immediately, more removing the annoyance rather than actually making the game easier. Now, it does eliminate some level of strategy, but more importantly, some level of patience, which is a big part in difficult gaming and something I actually really like in older video games to a high level. Now, this does help define a game like Monster Hunter, and you could see those parts as boring and unnecessary, but I bet some people really enjoy that component of the game as well. We haven't seen how more difficult monsters interact with the Sacred, however, and how they interact with the environment as a whole, because that could make this entire point moot. For example, Bahara traps you in a sand whirlpool of which only your Sacred can save you. This is less about making the game easy, but rather adding more depth and new mechanics to engage with, in which the Sacred is heavily involved. Maybe you have a monster that creates a tornado and you need the Sacred to escape out of it, but when you do, you're in a position that's really easy for a monster to attack you. And maybe some monsters are really good at dragging in the Sacred, and so you don't actually want to be on your mount. I want to see more features like that even though the Sacred fixed a lot of the quality of life stuff, it doesn't actually take away from the Monster Hunter experience itself. On that note, another thing we need to consider is that the game has increased overall mobility. This makes it a lot easier to close gaps or gain distance against a fast monster or even an airborne one. Some of the most fun fights I remember when I was playing Monster Hunter Tri are trying to manage the omnidirectional movement of something like a Rathalos as you are a lone hunter in the wilderness just trying to survive. Now, I don't love this change where you can get around everywhere really easily, but that's been coming in the Monster Hunter series for quite some time, and these monsters move so quickly that it might actually be a minimal issue. It's not like a Sacred is going to outrun Rathalos. The big difference here is Rathalos has less opportunity now to actually shoot fireballs from a distance. However, if you're getting hit by one of those fireballs, you need to go find a different game, honestly. They're pretty slow moving, they're coming from far away, he's not usually doing it right next to you. Come on, you gotta figure this out by now. The other change that's come into the game is focus mode. It makes the combat mechanics a lot more enjoyable than they've ever been before, and I am loving the use of focus mode because you don't feel locked into arbitrary direction when making motions with different weapons. For example, the greatsword has this giant slash that requires you to position perfectly right when you begin to charge up the weapon, but now you can actually change direction during the motion of the attack. This makes every weapon way easier than it was in previous titles, and it also adds new ways to play and more dynamic gameplay to fighting monsters. Ultimately, it didn't make much sense that you couldn't move while completing a given movement, but the focus mode is almost too easy in the other direction. Some level of delay or restrictions could have been really cool to make it feel more rewarding when you nail that max damage greatsword slash, but now I feel like you can just get it pretty much every time as long as the monster doesn't move away too fast. Now, at the same time, it would have felt out of place to prevent movement at any stage if unrestricting it in the first place, so it's kind of a damned if you do and you're damned if you don't, and ultimately focus mode is going to make the game so much more fun and intuitive that it's definitely worth the trade-off of removing some of that rewarding gameplay in getting perfect timings with your different weapons. Now, to continue on this, there are heaps of quality of life improvements in the game that make it more accessible to so many more gamers, which is a huge win for the game as a whole. I wanted to give them a mention since they can be seen as making the game easier, but rather polish existing mechanics that were not making the game difficult intentionally, but rather unnecessarily. Some of these include the ability to roll barrel bombs from a distance, which will still be used the exact same way as before, despite what someone might tell you, just have more meme quality to it. Improved AI hunters, which improve solo play, but previously the AI hunters were all just aggro redirects anyways, and you don't need to use them if you don't want to. And although they will probably do additional damage, I don't see them defeating an Elatrion on your behalf. The Secret Auto Run feature simply gets you back to the fight faster without all the headache of shooting all the paintballs, searching 5 empty zones, and all that kind of crap. It's just annoying. The Secret Auto Run is incredible. Automatic material gain after actually cutting off parts, such as tails and things like that. Ultimately, if you are carving an item like a tail during a fight, it's only if you expected to lose the fight and get out with some sort of reward anyways. Now, this way, where it's done automatically, it saves you time so you can just keep playing the actual game. I did kind of like the idea of standing on the tail and carving it. It's a nice vibe. I don't know how else to describe it. I will really miss that, and I hope they add it back in some way, but at the same time, it's quite unnecessary from a gameplay perspective. And the last quality of life thing I want to talk about is it is simpler for you to hunt for materials through the new free roam questing system, where you can just run around, hunt different monsters as you see them, and get materials based on quests that you just like auto add to your list and things like that. Many times you're grinding for a specific monster drop, and this just makes it easier journey for players, especially if they're traveling in squads. Fantastic change from the team here. Now, we can talk about how the game is more accessible and is now simpler than ever for beginners, and how that might make the game too easy. But it's worth noting that some additional systems are coming in to make the game more complex in some ways that it actually makes it more rewarding. So they're taking out some things that were just plain annoying, and they're adding new systems to take their place to add some complexity, depth, and interesting mechanics for you to explore as you play this new game. The first one here is you need to engage with the new dynamic weather systems that affect how you approach hunts for any given monster. It also opens up more opportunity for using your slingshot, rewarding you for being strategic. Maybe you're leading the monster under some sort of stalactites that you can shoot down from the ceiling and things like that, which will be really fun. The best part about difficulty in gaming is you want to be rewarded for thinking your way around a problem. And like the new weather system, these other mechanics achieve the same thing. The food system is much more complex now, fun to interact with, and honestly, I haven't done enough research on it to even discuss it right here. We don't know how it will play out in the late game, but we've seen that some monsters actually travel in herds, and turf wars are an even bigger component of this game than they even were back in Monster Hunter World. If difficult fights in the game have other large monsters interfering with you, then it can add this new element of dynamic gameplay. Previously, we were rarely using dung pods. Sometimes we did, but only once per a fight, and spending a lot of time on paintballs instead. But this time, we would need to be way more tuned into the monster and its general ecology, especially if they like to hunt in packs. I'd also like to see some monsters that don't even get affected by dung pods, or it takes a lot more effort to remove them from the area so that it forces you into more of a difficult situation. Fighting two monsters at once is fun. I don't care what anyone says. It also gives a lever to Capcom to increase or reduce the difficulty of a given fight, and maybe even additional benefits to late game difficulty systems such as G rank does. Now, they have also added added in the wounds system, which ultimately makes you deal what feels like way more damage to monsters, but honestly, it just rewards skilled play. You are actually fighting against an opponent rather than just hitting the object in front of you, like kind of like hitting like a punching bag or something like that, right? If this is balanced against damage and HP values for monsters, then you can make the game more difficult for inexperienced hunters and improve your effectiveness as you improve at the game, creating this skill curve or this difficulty curve that's really satisfying to play through. This is how difficulty in gaming should truly be handled. Now, like I said before, there is one last major change that I need to touch on since it messes with a core fundamental of the Monster Hunter formula. You can now carry 2 weapons into battle. This seems minor on the surface, but the ability to carry a damage weapon and a status inflicting weapon, or a ranged and melee, or a DPS and defensive weapon changes the game quite a bit. This is mostly impactful in solo play, since in multiplayer you have lots of freedom with the ranged weapons, but now in solo play you can use a melee weapon and only swap to ranged when the monster is doing something specific that benefits that playstyle. This definitely makes the game easier since you can customize your equipment to take on a foe that might excel in one key area at different stages of the fight, never ever putting the hunter at a disadvantage. Now, it's a welcome change, it's a lot of fun, but what needs to happen is the monsters need to leverage this information in their AI, in my opinion. If I'm running a lance, the monster should gain distance, and if I switch to a heavy bowgun, I pray the monster closes the gap quickly. Without this, I fear it will simply be way too easy to adapt to an opponent that is supposed to have a considerable size advantage on you, and it somewhat kills the power fantasy for me. Anyways, I hope you learned something today. I really appreciate all the support I've received so far, and if you love Monster Hunter, then please subscribe for more content.